And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, lurking in the background, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the US. Greetings, Herr Gunnarsson.
Hello there. Is it also really hot where you are?
Yeah, it used to be, but something like 3 hours ago, a huge storm commenced, and it rained not just cats and dogs, but also big pieces of ice. A few cars seemed to have been damaged, that kind of lowered the temperature quite a lot, from 34 to 24. So yeah, it's actually very tolerable at this point, but it wasn't like that.
Apart from the damaged cars, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and actually there were minor damages, but yeah, still a bit of an expense. But it's good that it happened, because a storm like that has been predicted for the last week by the meteorologists. They said there will be a storm this week, and eventually it came.
Eventually it arrived.
Yeah, eventually it arrived, and it's good that it happened, because I can finally breathe without having severe concerns over will I be able to breathe 5 minutes from now, because yeah. You didn't have a storm, the privilege of a storm in there?
We had some rain yesterday morning, so that was nice. So yesterday was pretty okay for the temperatures, but today it's quite hot again.
No, is it hotter than here? This morning at 12, at the noon, I mean, there were 41 degrees, and I was thinking...
Well, no, I guess you're more heat privileged.
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
quite as high here.
And I was thinking, if this continues for a few more days, I'm going to have to consider moving beneath the building or something. And then finally the storm came in and clarified things a bit. Okay, well, we have a shorter news section than usual, because, no, I'm going to be honest, because Facebook has been down, so it's been harder for me to gather pieces of news, and also because we're going to try to make it shorter than usual. We'll see if we'll succeed. The first one comes from the Telegraph, from an author at the publication Inside Man. A left-wing publication. Anyway, we must stop indoctrinating boys into feminist ideology. On Wednesday, the Daily Mail reported that a school in Oxford has become the first to introduce Good Lad workshops, in which boys are singled out for sessions that teach them about the, quote, scale of sexual harassment and violence aimed at female students, end of quote, and how they must stand up for women's rights. The workshops are the latest in a mushrooming series of initiatives in which ideologically driven activists are being invited into schools, driven by the belief that boys need to be re-educated to prevent them from becoming a threat to women. In November last year, The Times reported on a program in London schools in which 2 American women, one a former sex crime prosecutor, would, quote, reprogram teenage boys' sexual manners so they fit to a feminist world. According to the report, they start the class by asserting that, quote, misogyny is on the rise, end of quote, before going to, quote, describe real-life sex crimes that have happened to teenagers in this area with brutal accuracy. The article concludes approvingly that by the end of the session, the boys are scarred for life. Jumping a few paragraphs, another organization, A Call to Men UK, also goes into schools, stating on its website, A Call to Men UK believes that preventing violence against women and girls is primarily the responsibility of men. Oh, how things change. Anyway, we re-educate through trainings, workshops, presentations, school projects, and community initiatives. Boy, this sounds like 1988. Anyway, and yet another, the Great Men Value Women project frames its mission as about helping young men, but it's also driven by the belief that young men need to be re-educated as feminists, not just for their own good, but for women's too. On the section of their website listing the organization's values, their final point simply states, quote, feminism, this says it all, with a link to a video of TEDx talk entitled, We Should All Be Feminists. Really? Who says so? Most importantly, though, since when was it acceptable to impose ideology on school children? And for that matter, would we ever dare to suggest schoolgirls ought to be taught that great women value men? By all means, let's teach children about healthy relationships, but that's not really what these campaigns are about. Instead, there is an overwhelming emphasis on imposing an ideological worldview that first and foremost sees young men as potential abusers and perpetrators, whilst routinely ignoring and minimizing the very real threat of violence, both physical and sexual, that boys and young men face themselves. You'd never know it from the rhetoric, but a man, and particularly a young man, is around twice as likely to be a victim of a violent crime as a woman. And it's not just the drunken street violence either. A 2009 NSPCC report into domestic violence in teenage relationships showed teenage boys suffer comparable rates of violence from their girlfriends as do teenage girls from their boyfriends. Skipping a bit more, imagine what it must be like as a young man who has been beaten or sexually abused, possibly by a woman, to then be forced to attend a workshop that tells him that simply because he's a young man, he should hang his head in shame as a potential abuser. Neither are these activist interventions just the preserve of a few radical head teachers. They, in fact, reflect official governmental policy. In March, the government announced the introduction of a new consent classes for children aged as young as 11. The plans were launched on International Women's Day, and the PSHE guidelines repeatedly state that they're primarily part of the government's A Call to End Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Jumping a bit more, apparently in the eyes of the government, schoolboys don't so much see girls as their friends and peers, but as potential prey. And the indoctrination doesn't stop when a boy leaves school. It continues when he gets to university too. The Good Lad workshops in Oxford are in fact a spin-off from compulsory consent classes for new male students that are now springing up across UK universities. Skipping a bit more, if boys like these are already coming under attack in A-level English classes, what might they expect in a PSHE lesson, as one of the new suggested lesson plans proposed puts them through a quote conscience alley, in which they are asked to take on the role of a potential rapist when walk between their classmates who tell them what they think of their behavior. In 2001, novelist and feminist icon Doris Lessing made a shocking assessment of what she had seen whilst visiting a school classroom. She told the Edinburgh Book Festival, quote, "I was in a class of 9 and 10-year-olds, girls and boys, and this young woman was telling these kids that the reason for wars was the innately violent nature of men. You could see the little girls fat with complacency and conceit, whilst the little boys sat there crumpled, apologizing for their existence, thinking this was going to be a pattern of their lives." Lessing expressed deep concern that what she had witnessed was just a glimpse of an increasingly pervasive culture of toxic feminism in schools that was weighing down boys with a collective sense of guilt and shame. She had every right to be worried. It seems there is now a drive to make shame and guilt a formal part of boys' education. Wow.
Excellent article.
Considering the author and the source, yes, absolutely great article. I mean, come on, this is the guy who was trying to convince some of the people we both might know that alley fog is really not that bad. He seems that in the meantime has come to grips with reality, and yeah.
Well, it's definitely.
Go ahead.
It's definitely good news that these kinds of articles are now published on the Telegraph, and yeah, it's nothing really much I would like to add. It's just a good, solid article, and I basically agree with everything that's in there.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that there's still not enough, at least in my opinion, not enough outrage about the fact that 100% of the things described in there happen already or will happen very soon. I mean, nobody seems to be thinking yet of the long-term consequences of this. The Guardian attempted a week ago, had something like that, although significantly less on point than this article. But the title was something like that, maybe society one day will going to need tough guys again. And the commentariat was completely deriding. Who needs that? Well, you do realize that the UK is now in a peaceful place, but it's just a tiny portion of the world. The world isn't a peaceful place. Not yet, anyway. And by the way, in the last 10 years, it seems that it's been less peaceful than it used to be in 2007.
Yeah, and toughness is not just something you need in times of war. It's also
Absolutely.
very
Yes.
useful in times of peace. Just you need a certain amount of toughness to really make it to the top in the corporate ladder, for example, or in academia and so on. It's not these positions are not just handed to people because they're male or something like that. No, it's because they have these very dominant personalities, and they put in an extreme amount of effort and dedication and grit and so on, and that is really what you need to be extremely successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems that I'm sure I'm preaching to a choir when I say that, but still, it seems to me that there is a significant portion of the media class, of the chattering class, as I'd like to call them, who just seem to have forgotten everything about the real world. Just because you have you happen to work in a, I don't know, at the Guardian, for instance, or the BBC, in a very heated building and whatnot, or that doesn't mean that that's the only work that exists out there. Or it doesn't mean that that is the generalized status for most of the planet, or even most of the UK.
Yeah, and I mean, even in first world countries, there's still a pretty large number of people who do manual labor,
Absolutely,
who
yes.
work in construction sites and so on, for example, or who do all sorts of labor that still requires a lot of physical strength, and it's of course becoming less and less, but it's still a pretty significant part of the economy.
Yeah, and it will probably disappear only at on the moment when we will afford robots to do that entirely, which may not happen so soon as many would think. But yeah, okay. Oh no, the next one is. Go ahead.
Okay, this one is from The Guardian, written by none other than Jessica Valenti.
Oh,
One perk of older age: fewer catcalls. Being on the subways and streets of New York while female used to mean walking through a veritable gauntlet of harassment and catcalls. But lately, a curious thing has happened. My world is a much quieter place. The comments and lascivious stares from men have faded away the older I've gotten, leaving an understandable sense of relief. But alongside that is a slightly more embarrassing feeling of insecurity that, with every year that goes by, I become more and more invisible to men. From the time I was 11 or 12 years old, when I began taking the train to school, I've been on the receiving end of some of the worst things men say to girls and young women. There was the man in the business suit who told me to take care of those titties for me. The man who, when I was in 7th grade, masturbated in front of me on the subway platform near my home. The man who walked by me in the street, leaning close, and whispered, "I want to lick you," so close to my ear that I could feel his hot breath. It was miserable. But still, as much as I wish it didn't, the thought of not being worth men's notice bothers me. To my great shame, I assume I must look particularly good on the rarer days that I do get catcalled. Sure, there are plenty of reasons besides my age that street harassment has waned over the years. I'm more likely to be walking around with my 4-year-old daughter than not these days, and hopefully even harassers have some sense of propriety. And as women get older, they're less likely to put up with nonsense. I've become much more likely to scream at and shame catcalls in recent years. A much different tact than in my teen years when I would just drink into myself. There's a freedom to that. I wouldn't trade my quiet morning walks for the hellishness of my teen years for anything. But when you're brought up to feel that the most important thing you can be is attractive to men, the absence of their attraction, even negative attention, can feel distressing. Have I reached my quote-unquote last fuckable day already at 36 years old? I'm reminded of a Vanity Fair profile of the gorgeous...
Yes.
Sorry?
Have I reached my last
Okay.
Yes.
I'm reminded of the Vanity Fair profile of the gorgeous actress Rose Byrne, where the reporter noted with surprise that Bayern showed no embarrassment at admitting she was, gasp, 35 years old. I realize the most properly feminist response to all of this would be to proudly declare that I don't care, that being too old to catcall is glorious freedom. But that would be a lie. I do care in some way that sits uncomfortable with my politics. Enough that it worries me to wonder how I'll feel when I'm 45 or 65. I know that my reaction is normal, considering the culture I've grown up in, as much as I know that my self-worth does not depend on what strangers think. But I do wish there was more nuance in conversations about aging, beauty standards and feminism, room enough to admit without shame the complicated feelings we can have about it all. Being harassed in the street is not a compliment, and it surely never has felt like one. For most, if not all women, it can be scary and sometimes dangerous to deal with. But I can admit that, even as a seasoned feminist, sexism is a powerful enough force to still reside my head. Okay, that sentence doesn't make sense. Maybe by acknowledging as much as I can begin to let it go, hopefully long before I turn 45. Have all the copy editors at The Guardian just taken a day off or something?
I don't know. Maybe they saw Jessica Valenti read through the first paragraph and said, "This is bullshit. Just print it anyway."
You don't correct an unfuckable feminist.
The original title that was this under this was published first was "Men Don't Catcall Me Anymore" and something like that. And the second I read that original title, I was like, "Here, puss, 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 puss." Because seriously, that's what I'm thinking too when I hear the word catcall. I mean, here, puss, 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 puss. On the other hand, when she asked herself, "Oh, have I reached my last fuckable day already? Am I a mean person?" The first thing I was thinking is the Pink Floyd song "Wall." You know, you're just another break in the wall.
Actually, slight correction. The last sentence does make sense.
Okay.
Maybe by acknowledging as much, I can begin to let it go. So I think it's just missing a comma, I guess. But
yeah, as you said, maybe the copy editors got a day off or something, or maybe they just saw, okay, new piece by Jessica Valenti. Let's start reading. Oh, come on, this is too insane. Let's just mark it in the RT that we copy edited without reading it. Yes, that sounds fabulous.
So just to get serious about a moment, so feminists complain about catcalling. They don't want men to catcall. And simultaneously, she wants men to catcall her.
Not feminists. Valenti herself. Exactly.
Valenti herself, yes.
1 year ago, Valenti wrote an article about how catcalls should stop and whatnot. And here we go. 1 year later,
I guess they all read her article.
What?
I guess they all just read her article.
Yeah. I mean, here we go. 1 year later, she gets her desire happening in real life for her, and then she writes, "Where are all the catcalls?" I mean, pick one.
Yeah, it's just this completely contradictory demand. You cannot have catcalls and not get catcalled. It's just contradictory. It can't possibly happen. Maybe she wants just men to catcall her a little bit, so men should just use their telepathic powers and figure out exactly how much she wants to get catcalled, and then just do that if her daily quota has not been yet.
The trick to all this is that it has to be the right men to catcall her. If they're tall, dark, and handsome, and are rich or rich-looking, then she's going to take it as a compliment. If it's the homeless guy on the street, she's going to get all freaked out.
Yeah, but rich, handsome men typically don't catcall anyone because they just don't need to.
And that's what she's bitching and moaning about.
Maybe
She wants to have her cake and eat it too.
As far as I
Um,
understand it, she does want to get catcalled even by men who are not who she is not perhaps attracted to, just sort of to know that she is attractive to men and to get this sort of ego validation from that.
Yeah,
At
and
least
you
that's
said
how I read it.
maybe a little bit. So maybe men should invent a cat kilometer so they can measure and determine semi-objectively how much is a little bit and how much is the right amount, and then I don't know, make an experimental table on it and then start enforcing measurements. 1 Jessica Valenti, 2 Jessica Valenti, 2 Mega Jessica Valenti. Uh, yeah. Sometimes I wonder if Jessica Valenti is for real. I mean, for a while I was almost sure that she's just doing it to, I don't know, get cash and gather clicks. And then I looked for video interviews with her, and she acts the same, so she seems real. On the other hand, I'm still not entirely dismissing the idea that she's just a professional troll.
Yeah, I don't know if she's fake or anything like that. I think there are generally people like that out there. So I don't.
no. I don't think she's a troll. I think she's a opportunist. Like most of these feminists who do what they do on a professional level. She's not being a troll. She is being an opportunist. Look at feministing. She's the one who founded feministing.
Yeah, but she left the place, didn't she?
Huh?
She left the place. She's no longer contributing there or having any position in there, at least officially.
No, not any longer. But I mean, she wrote what, 2 books? One of which was lambasted for all the racist imagery in it.
Well, I guess that did prove to be a cash cow in a sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I also hear that
the republication of those books no longer contains the same imagery.
I also hear that most of these articles that she writes on The Guardian aren't exactly voluntary contributions, but in the sense that they're paid contribution and not paid with little money.
But yeah, I mean, this goes right through with what I'm saying. She's an opportunist. This isn't about ideology for her. This is about money.
I mean, if everyday feminism can afford to pay $100 for an article to pretty much anyone who submits one and is clickbaity enough, I'm thinking The Guardian pays Jessica Valenti a bit more for such a column. And given that most of Jessica Valenti's columns would take me, I don't know, half an hour at the most to write them, I mean, I'd like to be paid with $100 for 30 minutes of quote-unquote work. Wouldn't you like it, Jon?
Yeah, why not? Maybe I should apply to The Guardian.
No, we could apply to Everyday Feminism. They have open applications in there.
Okay,
All we need to do is create some fake feminist personas on Facebook, and we should be good. They don't check IDs too much.
Yeah, maybe it's a good business model.
The problem is that I don't have the insanity necessary to generate clickbait on and on and on. I mean, I could definitely write 1 or 2 or maybe 5 clickbait articles with feminist slant, but 50 or a few hundred, as Jessica Valenti has been doing for years now, I don't think I could do that.
Yeah. Also, what I find sort of interesting in here is that she thinks she has been brought up in this society to believe that it's important to be attracted to men. No. It's just biology. It's sexual reproduction. It's important to be attractive to potential mates. That's just pure biology. It's you don't need any sort of insidious patriarchal culture to explain why women want to be attracted to men. It's just
no, that's a white cis capitalist construct to oppress women. No. We all know it's patriarchy. In a more serious manner, I think it was actually even Valenti herself, if not her, some other fembot from The Guardian, who said that men being attracted to younger women is a social construct. And I was like, what? I mean, these people actually believe, or at least pretend very good to believe in this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, but I mean, haven't you read your Butler? Even the concept of women is already a social construct. So being attracted to a social construct can only be a social construct itself.
Well, absolutely, and in that case, then being a woman is a choice, and therefore any kind of oppression of women should be solved if women would just man up and stop imposing arbitrary shortcomings on them socially. Feminist theory, not as well thought out as you could. Yeah, at least Valenti makes us laugh, and that's good. That's probably the only utility I can think of of her columns. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is from Austria, from Die Presse. So let's have women working longer than to 60. Last week's debate about raising the pension age for women, triggered by an OECD report according to which Austria, quote, needs to catch up in matters of gender, unquote, was once more sobering. The Social Democrats immediately equated any urging of pension reforms with, quote-unquote, alarmism. But the numbers don't lie, and they show that there are good reasons for the supposed alarmism. The supplementation of the pension system through tax money is increasing rapidly. According to 2014 data of the Pension Commission, federal funds for pensions will increase from 9.7 billion euros in 2013 to 13.5 billion in 2019. Back in 2007, it was only 6.9 billion. The figures of the Economic Research Institute ECO Austria show a similar result, namely that only 57.2% of pensions are covered by contributions, while the rest is borne by the taxpayers. Since 1970, the length of pension payment has almost doubled for women and almost quadrupled for men. Moreover, the average retirement age is only 59.6, excluding Rehabilitationsgeld, which is sort of payment for disabled people who can't work. Moreover, the average retirement age is only 59.6, almost 4 years below the OECD average. In 1970, the average retirement age was 61.2 years, nearly 2 years higher than today. If we include all payments made by the pension system, which includes the new Rehabilitationsgeld, which is difficult to pronounce for some reason, the result is an average retirement age of just 58.9 years. Thus, we need to adjust all the levers to make the pension system safe for the future, so that we don't burden following generations. One of these levers is the pension age of women. With the planned gradual equalization between 2024 and 2033, Austria is unfortunately once more among the slowest in the EU to achieve the equality of pension ages. The EU, too, has recently recommended an earlier equalization to Austria. The lower female pension age is indefensible, both from a political and legal point of view. Many women would like to work longer than to age 60, we just need to provide the appropriate incentives. This is also a question of equal rights, since the last working years are usually the ones with the highest wages, and women are nowadays prevented from using these years, so a later pension age will contribute to closing the gender pay gap. With life expectancy constantly rising, female Austrian pensionists currently receive pension payments for an average of 27.6 years. In no other OECD country are women in retirement for longer, as the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung has pointedly remarked. The only way we can ensure reliable pensions for today's and tomorrow's generations is to finally have the increasing life expectancy reflected in the pension system. Moreover, the growing state expenditures on pensions severely constrains the budget for future-oriented investments, such as education. do we really want to pass on our society to our descendants in this state?
Question.
Go ahead.
Does Austria forbid people, or in this case women, to work over the age of 60? I mean, don't citizens, men or women, have the option to say, no, I don't want to retire right now. I still have this job and I still have 5 or 10 more years of contract and I want to work there? I mean, because that's how it seems, that's how it sounds from this article, that women are prevented from, are they?
Don't be silly, of course they're not. Of course you can work past 60. It's just that the financial incentives are sort of against that, in that
I don't think they are.
That if you keep working, you don't get the pension for these years you're working. I mean, there's a certain amount of money you can earn in addition to your pension, but it's only something really slow, like I think something like 300 euros per month.
That's a joke.
Sorry?
That's a joke. Yeah.
And if you work more, you can sort of continue in your job, but then you just won't get the pension for those years you keep working. So there's not really a proper financial incentive to keep working. So most women don't. But it's not like women are really being discriminated against here, which this article makes it sound like that. But it's just sort of the absurdity that whenever they talk about Gleichberechtigung, about equal rights for men and women, it's always couched in terms of women as somewhat disadvantaged. It's just without fail, Gleichberechtigung just means discrimination against women, basically.
Yeah, you also said it in another show a few months ago that gender means women too. I don't think. I mean, I don't know how to put it. Essentially, every single nation in Europe, whether in the EU or not, who relies primarily on a state pension system, is or will soon be in the danger of of having that particular system collapse, because a pension system is essentially a Ponzi scheme, but because the government is doing it, is somehow legal. If I want to do it privately, I'll go to jail. But it is a Ponzi scheme, and
yeah. But I mean, most things the government does, if you would do them yourself, you would go to jail. Try taxing your neighbors or something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. But still, I mean, this Ponzi scheme will not last forever, and as far as I'm concerned, that particular article sounds pretty much like it was written in Bucharest 5 years ago when we had this debate, and in here it was the president who eventually ejected the idea of straight-up equalization and opted for a more gradual increase. I think now with the age of retirement for women is 62 or 63. It used to be 60. But again, no matter how much you raise the retirement age, it will merely postpone the inevitable, which is the collapse of this particular Bismarck type of pension system. I mean, why not go with private pension system, where you establish the date when you retire, you can prolong it whenever you want. The private system doesn't give a tosh how you make the money, doesn't give a tosh if you make more money nearby next to the pension or things like that. Why not go that route? Poland seems to be the only nation in the European Union who's slowly moving towards that direction. Everyone else seems to just try and just keep saving the failing existence status quo.
Well, I agree with you. It's just sort of the argument against it is that if people fail to provide for their retirement, then they're going to be really poor when they're old, and also it's people just make a very low income and can't really afford to save for their retirement. Will have a problem when they get old.
So can they afford to save for retirement through a Ponzi scheme better?
Well, people who make very little money, they don't pay in much into the system, and then they get out more than they pay in.
Okay, but that can still be maintained through a different welfare scheme. Why does it have to be called pension? And why does everyone else need to be forced into that system just because of that? Because as this article says, only 57 or something like that of the pensions are covered by contributions. The rest of them are welfare anyway.
Yeah, it basically means that the system just pays out more than you pay in.
And the pay-in portion is going to keep on dropping because Austria, just like everyone else on this continent, has a severe birth rate problem.
Yeah, it's just a system that works sort of reasonably well as long as the population remains more or less the same. If the sort of generations are more or less equally strong in terms of numbers.
As long as you have a 2.2, 2.3 birth rate constantly, it can work. But once it goes below that, it's just a matter of time until it collapses.
Well, if it goes sort of slowly below that, then we get sort of progressively slightly smaller generations. That's still going to be okay. But if you have something like, I don't know exactly what the Austrian birth rate is. In Germany, it's something around 1.4 per woman. I think it's slightly higher in Austria, but it's just way below replacement level.
Yeah, in here it collapsed once the communism fell. It was 2.4, and it collapsed to 1.7 just in 2 years after communism fell. So you can understand why in '97 the system collapsed. And things like this can happen. And at the present day, I think it's Albania and the UK, the only two nations that are at the replacement level or a bit higher than that. Everyone else will going to have to face this issue, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, but you know how politicians are. They don't want to make these sorts of unpleasant changes. They're just going to have to, pass it on for another couple of years, and then they'll put in some more fixes or patches, and that'll save it for another couple of years, and they'll just push the can down the road and try to prolong this as long as possible.
Yeah, and until their term expires, and maybe the next politician will get all the shit for having to do the right thing. The most horrific case, in my opinion, was Britain, where they, in 2008 or 2009, they've made the right choice in extending private plans and whatnot. And then in 2012, they passed another regulation essentially forcing everyone back into the state system. And I was like, why? I mean, it took you 30 years to finally make the right call, and then 3 years later you abolish it. Why? And this kind of thing, I mean, now we can look at it relaxed and whatnot, but 30 years from now, it's going to blow up in all of our faces. It's going to be very nasty.
Yeah, I don't know when it's going to collapse, but it will at some point. It's just numbers just don't work out, and sooner or later they're going to have to face reality.
Yep.
And already read that Austria pays something like 14% of its GDP just in pensions. Just an insane number.
That's a lot. I mean, in here, the economists are worried because we're at something like 6.5 or 7, and it's already a lot of frenzy because it's too much. 14 is actually quite a lot.
Yeah,
and Austria
is one of the highest.
Yeah,
it has one of the highest percentages paid in pensions in the whole world.
Yeah, and Austria may be a rich country, but it's still a small economy. You can't just go like this for too long.
Yep.
They're not gonna like it, and this equality business, I don't know. I mean, if they want to keep the system working, they should go on the Bismarck rules. I mean, Bismarck, when he set the age of retirement at 65, something like 20% of the populace would even reach 65. So by that equivalent, now the age of retirement should be something like 80 or something like that. If they still wanted to work like it used to on Bismarck times.
Yeah, that's sort of kind of what this author is proposing. So though probably not as strict, but the idea that it has to be somehow tied to the life expectancy. Because if you have your life expectancy of 50, then having a 65-year pension age is perfectly fine, because most people don't get that old. But if you have a life expectancy of 80, then having, women go into retirement with 60 or even lower, that's just not really feasible.
Yeah, because it would mean most of them would cash 25 or 30 years of pension.
Yes, as the article says, it's the average time for women to be in pension is 27.6 years, which is insane. Almost 28 years.
That's the average. That means there is a significant chunk which goes to 40 or 30 something. Amazing. Yeah, that's quite a lot. And it's definitely economically unsound, but I don't know. I mean, Greece has been kicking the can down the road for so many years. So I guess if Greece could do it, Austria, which is a slightly more disciplined culture, can actually kick the can down the road even longer than Greece did. I don't know.
Yep.
Okay, let's go to the next one. The next one is not really from Europe, but since nobody is covering it, coming from Agence France Presse, AFP, 32 boys dead in South African initiation season. This is a very tragic news. Every year it happens. Traditional rite of passage ceremonies in South Africa left 32 boys dead and more than 150 hospitalized, local authorities said Tuesday, as the annual initiation season drew to a close. Most of the teens died from botched circumcisions, and an important element of the ceremony marking transition from boy to man, said Sifiso Ngcobo, spokesman for the Traditional Affairs Ministry. Others died from beatings, dehydration, or exposure to unhygienic conditions, he said. Of the deaths, 27 were in South Africa's rural and deeply traditional Eastern Cape province, where Ngcobo said over 150 had been hospitalized for burns, serious head injuries, and one case of partially amputated penis. The rite of passage into adulthood usually follows a bush retreat of 2 to 4 weeks, and it is widely seen as a test of physical endurance. The season for the rituals lasts around 6 weeks, coincided with the peak of winter in South Africa. But each year, teenage boys die or are left mutilated. A commission last year found over 400 boys died and 500,000 were hospitalized after attending the winter initiation schools between 2008 and 2013, with a major cause being complications such as infection after circumcision. The deaths have been widely condemned by government and cultural rights bodies, even whilst some defend the traditional initiations. It is really regrettable and unfortunate, Zolani Mkiva, spokesman for the Josa King sorry, can't pronounce that, told Agence France Presse earlier this month. This is one of those the most important rituals within our society. As much as it is important, we cannot afford to lose lives over this ritual. The importance of life is greater than the importance of the ritual. Most deaths occurred in unregistered initiation schools, so with some boys abducted and forced to undergo the ritual. In June, South African police rescued the 11 teenage boys from forced circumcision after their parents reported that they had been taken from the street to participate in the initiation. This year, the government shut down over 150 unregistered schools, including one in a township of Soweto outside Johannesburg. Parents have been encouraged to pursue criminal cases. The only real good news is that every year that passes, there's a smaller and smaller amount of victims. Except I think 2011 was a year which it had more than usual amount of victims. All the other years have been kept on decreasing since 2005 or something like that. I remember this because when I did that long article with the genital mutilation rates dropping globally.
Yeah, that is indeed good news, and it's also good that at least as far as I can tell, there's an increasing amount of coverage of this in the Western media, even though it's still sort of very low-key.
Yeah, I mean, European and North American media usually takes pieces of news from Agence France Presse, although this one seems to have been missed for some reason. It has only been taken over by small blogs, and that's it.
Okay. Yeah, and
this is why I picked the primary source, because all the others are less trustworthy.
Yeah, and it's something that gets talked about not enough, especially when this whole discussion about So discussion about the female genital mutilation, how it's so much worse than circumcision and so on. But here's these dozens of cases of people who die from that every year. So it's not exactly a safe procedure when done with bush knives and
Not
things
exactly
like
a
that.
safe procedure when done in top-notch hospitals. I mean, something like 100 a year die in the United States following hospitals, quote-unquote, safe procedures. So,
A couple of hundred each year. That can't be
100,
right.
100, close to 100. So some between 95 and 103 every year.
That seems really high.
It is a lot, but on the other hand, there are a few million procedures every year. So when put into that context, it's not really that a lot as a rate in the US. But still, it's quite a lot. Individually taken, 100 cases every year in one of the most safe places on Earth, in US hospitals. That's still a lot.
That number really surprises me.
Yeah, well, it's even admitted by the CDC, although they try to downplay it and say, oh, but we're not really sure. It could be other factors. Well, yeah, there are other factors, such as severe bleeding 2 days after the mutilation. Yeah, it is another factor, but yeah. I don't know. I guess the good thing is that the South African government is starting to enforce its own laws, because circumcising minors is forbidden by law in South Africa, by the way. And considering that, yeah, I mean, it's good that they're starting to at least enforce their own laws. Until 2 years ago, the law was there only for to parade in front of people like us when we were asking, but that's pretty much it. It wasn't really enforced, but now it seems that they're starting to enforce it, which is great.
Yeah, it's definitely good.
And since we're on that topic, let's try the next one.
Okay, this is from anongalactic.com. German hospital tries to prevent circumcisions. Number of circumcisions drops from 17 first half of 2014 to 11. Procedure only performed by doctors. A hospital in the German city of Essen is campaigning to prevent ritual circumcisions, leading to a drop in the number of procedures performed this year compared to the corresponding period last year, from 70 to 11. The Der Westen.de news site cited Dr. Peter Liedgens, the director of a pediatric surgery at Elisabeth Hospital, saying that he has managed to persuade 3/4 of parents at his hospital to rethink circumcision. The website also claims the hospital would cease to perform childhood circumcisions. However, a hospital spokesman clarified to the Jerusalem Post that, while it still performs circumcisions and has no plans to stop, it performs them only on children above the age of 1 and only under general anesthesia. Sorry about that. Quote, circumcisions are performed only by our pediatric surgeons and not by ritual circumcisers on hospital grounds. So the new policy doesn't really change anything concerning this procedure, explains spokesman Thomas Karlhöfer. Asked if the hospital will try to deter religious families from circumcising their children, Karlhöfer told the Post, "We respect the religious grounds of families asking for circumcision, and we don't actively want to persuade them to desist. Our surgeons are arguing from a medical standpoint according to the new medical guidelines of the German Society of Pediatric Surgeons, who recommend to perform circumcision only for medical reasons," he said. In 2012, a Cologne court ruled that circumcision was a form of bodily harm subject to criminal penalties, generating vehement protests from Jewish organizations and Israel. While the Bundestag moved swiftly to pass legislation enshrining the right to undergo circumcisions, several German medical associations are strongly opposed to the practice.
Now, you said that you have some doubts over the legitimacy of this story because everyone seems to be linking to dervechten.de.
Yeah, I do think it's a legit story. It's but sort of all references I could found linked to this one article, and but at least sort of on a sort of quick online search, I've found sort of sort of a flyer to sort of a panel discussion on circumcision held at this university. Also, this mentioned Dr. Liedgens was participating, so I'm inclined to trust this. So there's one thing that that possibly got lost in translation or something like that, which where they say that this Dr. Liedgens has managed, or that they have managed to persuade 3/4 of parents at his hospital to rethink circumcision. What it actually says in the original article is that Liedgens estimates that about 1/4 of the parents decide ultimately not to have the circumcision after having this this talk, and he estimates that and he says for the other 3/4 at least they've sort of thought about or rethought about circumcision, but they still go through it with it anyway. So this passage is wrong, or at least highly misleading in this article.
And so it's essentially the proportions are exactly the other way around as they're written in this English version.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes the news slightly less good, but still, it's a step in the right direction. Although I still think that the Norwegian way is superior. No, we're not going to do it. Fuck off. If you don't like it, go ahead and travel half the country. If you don't like it, goodbye. That's the kind of approach that I approve better, because it works. It reduced. I mean, yeah, sure, there was a lot of bitching, complaining from the Muslims and from the Jews around there, but quite frankly, I don't care. I think doctors should follow the examples of the doctors aligned with the pro-life movement and just use their unalienable right to just refuse procedures on medical grounds. And I think they even have a much better moral and legal case with this one than with abortion.
What they're doing at this hospital is that they are refusing to do circumcisions. Except on medical grounds.
Except on religious grounds.
Except on medical grounds.
Why? Because it says here that sorry, you're right. Yes, but still it goes out. But we respect religious grounds of families, and we don't actively want to persuade them to desist. Why not? Why not? And I know I sound like an a-hole when I say this, but seriously, I mean, I think it's probably about time to no longer give religion such a huge status on these kinds of serious issues. I mean, I can understand giving a religious opinion a more relevant status on things that don't actually involve, I don't know, chopping healthy pieces of other people. But in this kind of issue, I don't think religion should matter that much. In fact, it shouldn't matter at all.
Yeah, it's just that you can't really do that in Germany with
fair enough. Yes.
With the whole Judaism thing. You know, if it were just Muslims, then you could do it. But you know, even though of course the vast majority of people who get circumcised in Germany are Muslims, but with the sort of Jewish thing, it's you can't really say fuck off. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, you can't do that in Germany, but you can do it in Denmark to such an extent that in Denmark, Danish Jews have essentially renounced circumcision, because the very few who want it either usually go to Israel, but most of them say, well, why bother? At the end of the day, we have been living in Denmark for X hundred years from generation to generation. Maybe it's time to we adapt to the Danish society. And at first I thought it's a joke, but then I got into contact with several Danish Jews, and they've confirmed me that yeah, most of the Danish Jews no longer circumcise their sons. So I think I don't know, maybe someone from the Danish Jewish community should contact several rabbis from the German side of the continent, and I don't know, persuade them, maybe, or maybe I'm too much of an optimist on this one.
Yeah, the sort of the thing with Judaism in Germany is that because Judaism is one of the religions that is sort of state supported, you get where you have this deal,
Subsidies and whatnot.
you have this deal in
the religious
in,
tax.
Yeah, the religious tax that
Yes.
that adds something like 8% on your income tax, and that goes to the religious organizations, and because of this sort of enshrining of this sort of official Judaism in Germany, they are sort of kind of more orthodox than most of the actual Jews living in Germany. So
Yes.
they are sort of a bit more strict about religious observance than Jews in Germany would probably be outside of this sort of state intervention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, sounds pretty much like it is here with the Orthodox Church, that is significantly more Orthodox than the actual Orthodox Christians living in the country. Yeah.
So convincing the sort of official Jews to renounce circumcision is not going to happen anytime soon in Germany.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and organizing grassroots things, it becomes even more complicated. Yeah, I see your point. I guess that's a bit too optimistic for me. But still, I think that what these doctors are doing is a step in the right direction. Even if they convince one case per trimester is still good. I mean, doctors at the end of the day measure their success with every patient, as opposed to researchers who measure their success in large numbers. So yeah. Okay. The last one is essentially the one that gave the title "Increasing Legal Shenanigans for Non-Feminists." I chose this story has been everywhere now, but I chose the link from truthrevolt.org for the simple reason that it's the shortest version of it. Essentially it says America's future Canadian man faces jail time for disagreeing with feminists. A Canadian man, Gregory Elliott, faces 6 months in jail for having a disagreement with feminists on Twitter. He has been charged with criminal harassment. The case involves two feminists, originally it was 3, who claimed they were harassed in 2012 by Elliott on Twitter. They are currently in court in Toronto. One of the complainants, Stephanie Guthrie, met with Elliott 3 years ago to interview him about working for her organization, Women into Politics. But according to the Toronto Star, Guthrie was creeped out by the man who said he was, quote, really intense, and so she decided not to hire him. Court documents show that the two remained cordial through email correspondence after their meeting and also continued their casual relationship via social media for almost 10 months. But things took a turn when Guthrie went after an online video game that allowed players to virtually punch the face of a feminist blogger. It was that punch Anita in the face game, by the way. Anyway, she joined other feminists who made it clear they wanted to publicly shame the game's creator. Guthrie had written on Twitter, quote, I want his hatred on the internet to impact his real-life experience, end of quote. Seeing the message, Elliott reacted, creating the hashtag fascist feminist, and attacked their viewpoints without once being threatening or violent. Yet he was arrested in November 2012, fired from his job, and now faces jail time. In court this last week, Guthrie rolled her eyes during cross-examination by Elliott's attorney, who asked about her left-leaning politics. He then asked, why would you roll your eyes at a trial where my client faces serious charges of criminal harassment? She said she didn't see the relevancy of such a question. And then it used to have a video in there which no longer exists because National Review is being a dick with copyright. Anyway. The thing is, several cases like this have been attempted in Europe too. It was the case in where was it? In Sweden, where the maker of the documentary Hyun Skygget was harassed, and by the way, she was a feminist coming from, I think it was Georgia or Kazakhstan, one of these two. And she's no longer a feminist now, obviously. And yeah, she made a documentary exposing the feminist bigotry within the Swedish feminist establishment, and she had a lot of shenanigans, and she was eventually acquitted. But the trial took quite a lot, and her documentary eventually ended up censored. Now, of course, it was leaked on the internet, and nothing gets censored on the internet, but still, you can no longer legally broadcast it in Sweden. Then what? Then was that there were several cases, admittedly not feminist related directly, but still there was a comedian in France who was also had legal shenanigans both with feminists and Jewish organizations because he poked fun at them on one of his shows. Then there's Britain, who imprisoned a 17-year-old for posing a rose on Twitter, and apparently that was threatening and intimidating and blah 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 blah. And of course there is the EU itself, which still hasn't officially rejected the European Framework for Tolerance, which, if it will ever become a law, it makes essentially a crime to criticize feminism anywhere and in any medium. So yeah,
how's that for tolerance?
How's that for tolerance? Yes. And this is just that I can remember right now after thinking like 1 minute. So this kind of thing isn't foreign to Europe at all. However, if this guy gets convicted, Canada may actually out-PC Europe and become the first nation to actually send people to jail for disagreeing with feminists. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this article is sort of downplaying what this guy did or something.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I've looked through the long Twitter threads and whatnot. There was nothing in there that could reasonably be construed as criminal harassment. I mean, look at it in this way. Recently, Ben Shapiro was grabbed by the neck and said, "You cut that out, or you're going home into an ambulance." And the leftist media says, "Oh, that's not a problem in there." So, following that standard, what this guy did is
he was just concerned for his health, of course.
Yes, of course, absolutely. So no, I'm not buying any of the allegations coming from the Canadian prosecutors. It just doesn't make any sense. And this thing that it's wrong to have a game where you punch Anita Sarkeesian in the face. Well, so fucking what? I don't care if you think it's wrong. I like the game. Fuck you. Seriously, I mean, think about it like this. There have been Mortal Kombat characters with Jack Thompson, where you would exercise how you would behead Jack Thompson, or feed him to the sharks, or throw it into a huge fan and be shredded into pieces. Have you ever heard Jack Thompson whining about that? No, he understood that it's part of the business. He understood that most people disagree with him. And he continued his fight until he finally lost all the appeals possible. He tried to ban some video games. And that's it. And that was the end of the story. Feminists can't realize that most people will disagree with you? Or at least a significant proportion of people?
Yeah, but the thing is that Jack Thompson is an older white man, and he just doesn't get these sort of pity points that these women can get.
Yeah, so, he's very low on the oppression scale.
I mean, if Jack Thompson could get all sorts of pity and all sorts of support for playing up his victimhood, then he would probably do it too. But that's just not an option for him.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess the reason why I brought up this topic is essentially if there's any way to curb, or at least attempt to curb, at least lose with dignity if we're going to lose this battle for free speech. Are there any way to attempt to curb this particular nonsense? Because admittedly, Canada is also an extreme case. They have these Kafkaesque human rights tribunals, which have, like any other progressive court, it means exactly the opposite of what it says. It has nothing to do with human rights. It has everything to do with censoring and meddling and interfering with everyone who doesn't support progressivism. But still, is there any way to at least attempt to fight against this nonsense? Because I don't know, I kind of tend to like this free speech thing, I really do. I have this propensity towards liking every single bullshit out there to be free to be aired. I don't have to like everything that comes out of free speech. In fact, I don't like most of what comes from free speech, but I still like the idea, the principles.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it, because the thing is that free speech is seen as very valuable in Western culture in general, and Canada is not really an exception there. So the sort of idea that they're bringing in there to actually limit free speech is to say that hate speech is not free speech. That it's some sort of that it has to be considered some sort of threat, for example, which is of course not allowed under free speech. I can't say hand over your wallet or I'll shoot you and point a gun at you. Even if I don't point a gun at you and it's a credible threat, then it's still illegal, even though it's free speech. So they're using these kinds of strategies, equating these very different things, and I think you have to focus on pointing out the sort of the hypocrisy they're engaging in and the sort of false equivalences that they're drawing between offensive speech and threats, for example. Sometimes there's not a very bright line between threats and insults, for example, but in most cases it's a pretty clear-cut case, and I haven't looked at this particular case, but if you say it's nothing that could be construed as a threat, and I believe you, and then it's a pretty clear-cut issue, but
well, it's not according to the Canadian justice system, and one of the reasons why it's not is because Canada, unlike the United States and unlike some countries of Europe, Canada doesn't have an equivalent of the First Amendment. There is no clear-cut constitutional protection against for speech that might offend. Because in the United States, enacting or prosecuting someone for offensive speech, criminally prosecuting them, it's kind of that case where the judge says the door is that way, ma'am. We have something called the First Amendment in this country. Get the fuck out. In Canada, no. In Canada, you can actually weasel out from most of the Charter of Human Rights protections because it's not a clear-cut thing. And sadly, there are quite a lot of countries in Europe who also have this kind of ambiguity and not a clear-cut protection. I mean, in my country, for instance, there is actually a particular article in the Constitution that says exactly that censorship of any kind is forbidden. Period. That's it. There's no way to argue against it. However, in other countries, I think in France, censorship is in fact explicitly allowed if you can make a case for national offense or things like that, which allows comedians to be prosecuted in France, and in Canada to have Twitter bloggers or whatnot be prosecuted because a feminist said so.
Yeah, in Germany too. Like, for example, you can theoretically go to jail for insulting the president.
Who is the president of Germany? Don't mind me asking, but I really don't know who the president of Germany is.
He's not very important.
You think? I mean, seriously, you can try to force me quite a lot, and I will never be able to answer these two questions. Who is the president of Germany and who is the president of Hungary? I have no idea. I never knew. I know who the prime minister of Hungary and the chancellor of Germany is, but I never know who the president is. But going to jail for insulting the president, you would have to know who he is for the
But it's actually, as far as I know, it's not a law that has ever been actually enforced. There was like one case where this was sort of threatened, and maybe it would go, but then the president didn't actually press on this, and it never went anywhere. So, but it's at least sort of on the books, these kinds of laws, and
it allows the state discretionary powers. Yes.
Yeah, and sort of just in general, it's not doesn't have to be the president, but just certain kinds of insults are criminal, and you can be prosecuted. You don't really go to jail. The president has sort of this special position because he's the head of state, at least sort of on paper.
Yes.
But just, if you say, if you, for example, insult a policeman, and you get a hefty fine for that. And,
insulting a policeman, then that comes in under the police statutes and whatnot. In theory, you could have this happening in here too, although policemen never enforce it, because that would be quite an unpopular thing to do, since the police has never been popular. At least not in the last 70 years in here. So getting a fine because you cursed at a policeman, you'll definitely find a friendly judge who will just quash it, because the judge will probably say, well, the policeman probably deserved it. Yeah, we don't really like the police in here, and for bloody good reason. But still, yeah. Denmark also had these lèse-majesté type of laws. They eventually came around and abolished them. If you said something about the clothing of the king and things like that, you could go 3 months in jail. And it was actually one case in the last 30 years, but still, one case too many.
I remember one case in Germany. We have sort of for speeding, we have these sort of cameras that are placed on the side of the road, and if you're too fast, they take a picture of you and they send you the picture and along with a bill. Yep. There was one case where a man got caught by one of these
with the mistress.
Yeah, and he flipped a bird at the camera, and then he was convicted for this sort of insult against a servant of the state, and had sort of a hefty additional fine for that.
What? That's so... What? Okay, in here there was a big scandal when those sorts of cameras were introduced, because it could catch you with your mistress or your lover, in the case of female drivers, and they had to edit the software in such a manner that it will only catch the licensing plate and get the address from there, so it won't at least ruin families as opposed to just enforcing fines. But yeah, come on, being sentenced for insulting a device? Oh, Jesus. Okay. That's quite creepy, because it makes it easier to just introduce more shenanigans for non-feminists. I mean, if you can be convicted for insulting a device, an inanimate object at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, there's people watching this, so they get insulted by your finger and...
Yeah, still. Still, I mean, sorry, but that's insane. I mean, it really is. But if you can do that, then the enforcing shenanigans for non-feminists should be quite easy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any cases where people have been convicted for this kind of stuff, of criticizing feminism. I don't really know of any cases where that's been the case in Germany.
Yeah, and the reason why I titled this "Legal Shenanigans" is because this goes even beyond criminal charges. I mean, Canada again is a very extreme case on this, but I've read from my own country that Automobile Forum was been fined because some feminists cried that they were offended by their ad. I mean, this is still essentially legal shenanigans for non-feminists. I mean, the guys from the Automobile Forum, they're definitely not feminists. They're not necessarily anti-feminists, but they're not feminists. They don't give a toss about the feminist ideology. And they've been thrown into legal shenanigans because adherents to the feminist ideology whined. And these kinds of cases are still concerning to me. I mean, I still don't see that good. I mean, sure, I can't imagine this country ever sending someone to jail for disagreeing with a feminist. I can't imagine that happening. I mean, we would rather burn down the parliament before that happens. But yeah, it's semi-funny. But remember, we actually did do that for less than that. But still, these kinds of legal shenanigans are concerning and should be reason for concern for anyone interested in this nice little thing that we have, which is essentially the ability to say whatever we damn please. And I can understand that argument. Oh, but insults are bad and what? Okay, so what? I mean, I would rather have insults than to have essentially thought police and risking jail because I disagreed with the wrong sort of people on the internet. I would rather have insults. I would rather have a bunch of leftist trolls invading my channel and whining that I offended their precious leader and whatnot. I'd rather have that. I'm perfectly fine with that, as opposed to the possibility of imprisoning people for political disagreements at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's. I somehow doubt that this guy will actually get thrown in jail for 6 months for this, because at the end of the day it is still sort of a Western country that at least pretends to uphold these Enlightenment values, and sending someone to prison just for criticizing feminism in sort of robust language, that's I think even for Canadian people, that's just going too far.
I think it was National Post who made this point, that it's not really that whether he'll serve time in jail or not. It's important that he gets acquitted and not convicted, because Canada is just like Britain and to a certain extent the US too. They work on this system that if one particular idiotic judge makes a call, it has the potential to become essentially a new law through the Anglo system of legal precedents. So if he gets convicted, even if he gets convicted and then ordered to pay a fine and that's it, it's still very bad, because it creates the kind of legal precedent for more and more cases like this in the future.
Yep.
It's not like in Germany or in here or in most of Europe except for Britain and Ireland, where even if you get convicted, well, it's a stupid judge, you can get that overturned on the appellate court, and even if you don't, it won't affect the whole nation.
Yeah, I mean, the precedents, of course, still matter to some extent, even if you have a statute law system, but just not nearly as much as under common law system.
No, in the common law system, and I don't know, I used to be a bigger fan of the common law system, but the way things are evolving, I'm starting to like the civil law system a little bit better, because it's easier to... Go ahead.
I'm not sure on that. It's just on the one hand you can get some idiot judge who makes a stupid ruling, but you can also get an idiot politician that makes a stupid law, and I don't know, it's sort of a wash in my eyes.
Yeah, and then again, the stupid politician can be replaced in time, and it is slow. That's the biggest problem that I have with the civil law system. It is extremely slow, no matter on which end of it you're acting, whether to get a favorable decision or to get a politician to make the right call. It's extremely slow, as opposed to the common law system where you can get a faster resolution, and at least until recently, for the most part, quite a sane one, unless you're dealing with divorce. But So yeah, I guess we're gonna have to wait and see what happens with this case, and we also have to wait and see what the European Commission has in the bag for us, because
I just can't wait to find out.
yeah, there was at one moment it was about to expire that motion for the European framework of tolerance. I'm still following it, by the way, but you know the European Parliament is very slow, so breaking news are once a year or something like that. But yeah, there was a moment that it had to expire something like next month or whatnot, and in June they took very good care to prolong the debating time for that particular bill, because in August nobody's working in the European Parliament. They were thinking, oh my god, this is going to expire whilst we're all enjoying the sun in Ibiza or whatnot, or wherever the MEPs will go. So they prolonged the debating term for it until next year. So we may actually get that framework for tolerance, which essentially says that this show is on the equivalent of an ISIS radio show, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it?
The Belgians seem to semi-agree. For those of you who don't know, this show is semi-legal in Belgium. It's quite debatable whether it's legal or not to broadcast this show in Belgium. We haven't tested in court. We do have no intention to do so, but considering their laws against sexism on the internet, this show may not be fully legal in Belgium. So yeah, I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. But one of the last things I want to say is just this: if you're living in Europe, I will keep an eye on the bullshit that goes usually beneath the media radar. Because, for instance, in Hungary seems to be the only country where the Istanbul Convention didn't go beneath the media radar. It was actually openly discussed and then openly rejected. But in most countries of Europe, most of these legal shenanigans that in one way or another either impact men or non-feminists in general usually go beneath the media radar. I don't know, take a good look at these and, I don't know, catch them in time. Because otherwise we might get up one day and we'll no longer have the freedom to at least disagree. And that's
of course you have to keep these sorts of agreements, and you have to keep them out of the sort of public limelight because the general public is just not enlightened enough to understand these progressive policies. So
yes,
obviously our benevolent overlords have to push them through in secret.
Absolutely. Although, to be fair, in the case of the Istanbul Convention, it was mostly kept outside of the media radar, not by intention, but by mere ignorance, because they merely read the title of it, and the title of it sounds cushy and good, and nobody bothered to read the entire thing, because once you read it, you can no longer like it. At least not if you have two brain cells to rub together. And that was mainly the reason. For instance, the media in here thought like that for a while and said, well, but what's wrong with it? And I asked a newspaper guy, did you actually read the document? No, I haven't. We'll start reading it and then come back to me. And then he didn't come back to me. He just published an article saying that the Istanbul Convention is bullshit. So that's the thing. I think in the case of the Istanbul Convention, it's not by design, or rather, it's by design in the sense that the title was picked to be quite catchy and appeal to ignorance.
What is the title?
It's the International Convention Regarding Combating Violence Against Women and Girls.
Okay.
Which is good enough for people like us to have the bullshit detectors on, but most people don't turn on their bullshit detector when they hear such a title. They say, "Oh, but it's okay. So what's wrong with that?"
Yeah, of course, it's a long established practice to just name these horrible laws something really nice, like the law for the protection of puppies and kittens, and then if someone disagrees with that, you can call them, do you hate puppies and kittens? Do you eat kittens for breakfast, and so on?
Of course, I put kittens in my blender. Yeah, there are numerous such examples. I don't know. I don't want to be very asshole with this, but come on, Patriot Act. Do you even Patriot
What?
Act?
Are you not patriotic enough? Do you hate America?
Yeah. Actually, I don't, but yeah. Okay, I think we've hammered the topic quite enough, and time to leave our listeners alone and don't keep them for 2 hours. Because there are, can you believe it? There are people who wake up at 4 a.m. to listen to this show. And yeah.
That is some serious dedication.
Yep, it is. It is. And I recently received an email from someone who's been listening to this show since 2013, since I started doing it. He asked me a different question, and I'm going to answer to him in a public manner on my channel. But yeah, I mean, I was thinking, my God, this guy's been listening to me for 2 years. Wow. Okay. I didn't expect such people to exist, to be fair. No, seriously, I didn't expect. But that's probably because it's my tendency to have low expectations, so I get pleasantly surprised quite often. It helps to keep up the morale. Okay, yeah, speaking of my channel, shameless plug, don't forget to subscribe to my Freedom Alternative channel if you want to be terribly offended, or if you want to hear my very politically incorrect voice, because in here I'm very nice as opposed to how I am on my channel, where I'm significantly much more of an asshole, although not enough of an asshole according to some viewers. But yeah, anyway. And I think that's it from my end. Any final words, Herr Gunnarsson?
Take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. James, take us out.